as we roll into August and we start looking ahead at the end of the year, maybe, just maybe, repurposing or re-releasing some past episodes is on your mind as something you'd really like to be able to do. But you want to make sure that you're doing it strategically, you're doing it in a way that serves your listener, that serves your show, and of course continues to serve your larger business goals. That's what we're talking about today. We're going to talk about how you can be strategically repurposing content by answering the 3 most common questions I get about exactly this topic. Welcome to the More Profitable Podcast with Stacey Harris. I'm Stacey, and this is the spot to learn more about the strategies, tactics, and tools you need to build your more profitable podcast. My team and I work every day with podcasters like you to shift shows from frustrating time sucks to productive members of your sales team, because your show should be built to generate and convert leads. So let's get into it. I knew I wanted to have this conversation to kick off this month because we are doing exactly this month. We are repurposing a series. The rest of this month, you will get the Podcast Housekeeping series. Consider this sort of your August podcasting homework, if you will. I want you to sort of work along with those episodes. And we've talked about that this was coming up. We've talked about why we're going to do this. But there are still 3 questions I get probably just about every time this conversation comes up, whether it be in like a podcast strategy intensive, or it's even when I go into I'll go into group programs or masterminds or even networking communities. They'll hire me to come in and do like a Q&A or to talk specifically about repurposing podcast content or just podcasts in general. And almost every time, I can't think of a time where somebody hasn't had one of the 3 questions we're going to cover today. And that's why I wanted to do it in this format. Instead of just sort of delivering you 3 basic points, I really wanted to put my Q&A answers out here for you, because as I answer them, we're going to kind of give you some insights into the thought process on this, because that's the skill I actually want you to be looking to acquire. That's the shift in your mindset, in how your brain works with this, that I want you to bring in is, what's the decision making look like? What do I need to be considering when I'm doing this? And that's what we're going to break down today, is that thought process for yourself. Before we jump into that, if you heard me just now talking about a Q&A and are like, wow, it'd be really cool if there was a spot where I could go and just ask Stacey my super general, super specific, whatever podcast question. And you can. That's actually what we're going to do once again this month. We did it last month. We're going to do it again this month with our podcasting roundtable. So if you join us in August for the Podcasting for Profitability roundtable, head on over to uncommonlymore.com/roundtable to reserve your seat. It's 100% free. And I'm going to be answering questions. What will happen, to kind of give you a lay of the land, what will happen is after you go to uncommonlymore.com/roundtable and sign up, you will get an email that says, you're in, and it'll have the dates and the link to the Zoom to join us. But also, and this is the part I want you to be paying attention to, also, you will find, are you ready for it? A link that takes you to a form. That form is where I want you to put your question. If you want to save your question until we get to the call, cool, but I will be prioritizing questions that come in via that form. And personally, I'm terrible at remembering my questions. And so I wanted to build a way for you to be able to sort of put your question someplace. And we'll touch on it when we connect later this month. Again, August, Podcasting for Profitability Roundtable. Sign up is open now. The time, the date, all of that. uncommonlymore.com/roundtable. I cannot wait. I really cannot wait to see you there. It's going to be a good time. So with that said, let's jump into some of the questions that maybe you're already considering asking. And by the way, if you have follow-ups for anything that we're going to talk about today, that roundtable is a great way to get them answered. Let's dig into the first question I get maybe the most frequently. And that is, how often can I repurpose? How soon can I repurpose? Sort of the timing of it all. And I have sort of a basic generic rubber stamp answer to this, which is I highly recommend having at least 50 or about a year's worth of episodes before you even get to a place where you're considering repurposing. And that's not because people who listened to episode 15 are still going to remember episode 15 when you get to episode 40. It's actually not. What it is because you're still building your skills. Can you revisit or expand on a topic you've talked about already in those first 50 episodes? Absolutely, you probably should. But I'd be willing to wager that the skill, the process you sort of move through, the ability to communicate your point in a clear and valuable way has only improved in time. And so those first 10 or 15 or 20 episodes, probably not going to be your best pool of repurposable content. More often than not, it's really not until you start to hit that second year, that, 50 to 100 episodes, where you really start being able to confidently say, I know that's solid enough that we could re-release it. Again, what you may find is what you want to do is revisit. And this is something we've done in this show. We absolutely have episodes that we built, that we released before we transitioned into podcast production only, where I see we get traffic. I know we get people landing and listening. And the original version, we'll call it that, the original version of that podcast episode didn't do the best job it could do in serving our goals, in serving our show, and quite frankly, in serving who our listeners are and what they are looking to get from the show now. And so guess what we did? I recorded a new episode and we used that same show notes page. We just sort of replaced the old episode with the new one. And so you'll probably be doing more of that in those first 50 episodes. Again, not during that first 50, but on the other side, when you start to hit about 100, if there's something around episode 15 or 20 or 30 that you're like, oh, that'd be really good. I loved this topic. Give the conversation an old listen again. And then decide if you want to re-record that and re-release it that way versus being able to just re-release. What we're talking about today is being able to really just re-release content. Not replace it, not update it, just re-release it. For that, you're definitely going to need to be north of 50 episodes, north of about a year in, because that's when you are sort of to a point where you are generally doing a better job strategically crafting your episodes, and so they are better assets. This is one of the reasons we build strategies too, is because some of this isn't just time. Some of this isn't just experience. Some of this isn't just podcast skill or, host skill. Some of it is episodes that you record because they're what you want to talk about this week, or you kind of go into with half an idea and we'll see what comes out on the other side, tend not to be very good re-releasable assets. They tend to be what I call content for the sake of content. I checked the box. I got the episode out this week. And I'm going to tell you right now, we all have these episodes. All of us. Every single one of us have one of these episodes that are not our best work. Checked the box. Got us done that week. This is not bad. This does not mean our show is a failure. This does not mean we have failed as a podcast host or we are doing an inadequate job in some way. What it does mean is that the best way to avoid this, the best way to create assets that I can repurpose in the future, is I need to be thinking about it from the start. I need to be thinking about building that episode as an asset and not just an episode from the very beginning. So that tends to be one of those things that happens more commonly in the second year and beyond of your podcast. How frequently can you be re-releasing episodes? I try not to re-release anything more than once a year. Now, does that mean that I'm not re-releasing more kinds of episodes? Absolutely. But on episode, for example, and this, I'm going to use this as an example a lot today because it's easy, honestly. The series we're getting to run, or getting ready to run starting next week, that this is kind of adding to, we'll run it once a year. Ran it last October, so we're a little early. It originally aired last October. It was born out of my own Q3 planning, and I built it to go in August of this year. When I was building it last October, I knew we'd rerun it this year. And so I want you to look at, when you're building content, what will I be able to repurpose? How can I make this as evergreen as possible? The other side of this is there has to be a good balance of fresh content happening in your show too. Now, if you are somebody, and I have been hearing this goal more and more frequently lately, and so I want to speak to it. If you are somebody who says, cool, I'm going to do 52 episodes of the show, and then I'm just going to rerun that same 52 episodes every year. There's only ever going to be this 12 months of content, and we just start back at the beginning and re-release it. I have been hearing things of this more and more often, and it doesn't always look as dramatic as that. It's, there's lots of shades of gray, but it does tend to be a real lean on building a content library I can just repurpose. We have clients who repurpose a lot, who re-release year over year a good chunk of their episodes. There's not a single client we have where we're releasing less than probably 70% new content, 60 to 70% new content. Because yes, we want to be building assets that we can re-release. Also, we're learning more about our expertise, about our clients, and about what they need to know all the time. And how we talk about our expertise, our offers, how we share improves and grows and evolves in time. If you've been listening to this show for more than a minute, you hear that because I have. We've been doing this show for 10 years. I am not the same person who launched it. I don't present information the same way. Quite frankly, we don't even talk about the same thing anymore. Well, I guess we talk about marketing still, just a different way of doing it. But a lot of my opinions have changed. A lot of the things I've taught on this show, I have said, let's evolve that. This is what this looks like now. Some of that is the nature of the fact that this show for a long time talked about social media. And guess what? A lot of the things we talked about on this show straight up don't exist anymore. And so, yes, are there places where your expertise and what you teach and what you share is going to be more, we'll use the word stagnant, more set? Absolutely. But how you present it and what you know about who you have and or want to have listening is still going to grow. And so you will continue to need a certain amount of fresh content. I also highly recommend that fresh content that sits around your re-release episodes are what help keep those long-term listeners engaged in the re-release stuff. I'm telling you right now, there are people who know that this re-release series is coming and have already reached out to me via email saying, yes, I did this last year and I'm so excited. I just treated it like my month-long project. And each week I had time after I listened to the episode to do whatever it was we talked about that episode. And it was super helpful and I can't wait to do it again. I love that. That's so exciting. There's people who are looking forward to it. But some of that is because leading up to this and sitting on the other side of this will be new content that now will help give perspective and challenge ideas around the stuff that is getting re-released in the listener. Their ability to hear it differently. Their ability to let something in that maybe they wouldn't let in before. How many times have you been in a conference or been in a call with your coach and heard someone say something for probably the 30th time in your life, quite frankly, the 300th time in your life, and I'm not raising my hand, and we're going to pretend I'm not talking about me. And you've gone, oh, I get it now. I do need to do this, or I don't want to do that, or whatever the case may be. But you know for a fact you've heard this cliche or piece of advice and you have disregarded it time and time again because you were not ready to hear it. And so oftentimes some of the best feedback I get is, I heard this episode last year. I just sort of forgot about it. I listened all year, and now I was able to really hear and really implement why that's a great idea. Why this hasn't been a fit for me. Why that thing I've been trying was not working. And I wasn't going to hear it before. And that's okay. Let's shift into question number 2. Do I need to let the listener know? This one we're going to approach pretty quickly. First of all, we're not trying to trick anybody. But in most cases, no, you don't. You can just let it roll. Telling the listener in the title that it's a best of or a re-release or a replay can often cause a listener to assume, oh, I've heard it and I don't need to hear this again. It'll allow them to disregard what they're going to hear before they even get in there. So I tend to just present it as this week's episode because it is this week's episode. I'm not telling you it's a new episode, but this is the episode most recently added to the feed. I will tell you right now, although I'm telling you and have told you for months, that starting next week, it will be 4 episodes of re-released content. You will not see that in the feed. You will not see that. You will see, just like you see for this episode, podcast housekeeping, and then what the focus is for that week. Because this series is built to do this, and it's built to go out this way. It is built to get you to do something you need to do every year. You need to look at as you build your annual plan, your quarterly strategy, whatever it is. These are the pieces you need to be touching. You know, when inside of our Profitable Podcaster Mastermind in July, we talked all about analytics, and we talked all about breaking down shows, and we talked sort of, doing your own podcast audit. And I gave everybody a checklist, and it broke down four things. The things you need to do for your show weekly, the things you need to do for your show monthly, the things you need to do for your show quarterly, and the things you need to look at annually. And our podcast housekeeping series are the things you need to be looking at your podcast annually. And so I don't need to tell you it's a re-release, because it's not a re-release in the sense that it's just some episode that was good and here it is again. No, this is your once a year check-in. This is your cue to go do this bit of work in your show that you may otherwise avoid, because lots of us do. We all have that thing, right? And this is like, one of the super not sexy parts of this is just collecting and analyzing data. Boring. Well, I mean, I don't think so, but other people do. It's what I hear. And so I don't want to give you an off-ramp before you even get into it. So in that context, no. However, because nuance matters and nothing is ever black and white, yes, some cases I highly recommend having an intro, especially if there is something in the episode that is going to date it, that is going to anchor it in time. Maybe it was the season in which you released it and you shared something. Maybe some of the things you have mentioned in it have changed, but the larger message is there. I see this a lot with our production clients, where they'll have a testimonial we want to re-release, but there is some context around like dates in there. Cool. Let the listener know. We still don't do this in the title. Where we do it is in the intro to the episode. So we talk about episode structure a lot. But when we talk about sort of the structure of this episode, just to give you some context of what I'm talking about, the hook sits at the beginning. That's when I come in and go, hey, this will be good, I promise. And then you hear the standard intro, which is just sort of like the music and voiceover. And then you hear what I call the episode intro, which is me sort of pitching you the episode. Here's what we're going to talk about. After that's where we make our first call to action. In this episode, it was the roundtable. And then we got into the meat of the episode. At the end, we'll have our second call to action, spoiler alert, and then you'll hear the pre-recorded sort of voiceover and music outro. So where I recommend, if you are going to have, if you have a need to say, hey, by the way, this is a episode we released originally XYZ, here's why I wanted to share it again, I would put it in that episode intro spot. And I would say pretty much that. We originally shared this episode last June, but this was such a fantastic conversation with my client, Jill. We were able to really hit on A, B, and C, and I want you to listen for when she talks about insert important takeaway. Then I would go into my first call to action as just sort of a rough look through. So when I am telling people, I'm getting them into the episode, and I'm not just saying, hey, this is a re-release. I'm saying, this is a re-release, here's why I re-released it, and here's what I want you to listen for. That allows me to give you a reason to stay, even if you've been here before. So again, we're making sure that we're not allowing them, we're not making it easy for them to disregard the content, to toss this away as a rerun before they ever get into the value and purpose of why you're sharing it again. Let's wrap it up with our third question. How do I choose what to re-release? This is going to come down to three things. Your most popular episodes, the episodes that answer your FAQs, and a pre-built repeatable series. The repeatable series component is something this month, actually, we're working on inside of the Profitable Podcaster Mastermind. This is a component that I think just about every show should have. I'm trying to think as I say this right now. This is going to make me sound wildly unprepared for this episode. But I'm trying to think as I sit here right now, if we have a client who's at this stage of their show yet that doesn't have one of these. And I can't think of anyone who doesn't have one of these series. This series that we're kicking off, that I'm adding this episode to for August, the Podcast Housekeeping series, is ours. It is a series built to run and re-release on its own. Rachel Cook, who's a client of ours, we actually talked about hers on our podcast. I will link to it in the show notes, but she does this with her like a challenge, a 5-day challenge kind of structure. And guess what? We run it every year. And it's a fantastic component. So what I want you to look at is when you're looking to re-release episodes, what needs to be shared right then? Is it just about sort of delivering on content because you need a week off? Or I need some space before I am going to be able to record again or batch again or whatever? Cool. Most popular. Is it that you have a sales cycle coming up, or you are in a time where you're needing more sales? Like maybe you're like me and you don't have like an open and closed door launch window for the bulk of how people hire you. I mean, I guess the exception to that is the mastermind. But for the most part, it's just like when we need clients or want or have expanded availability, or we haven't filled our podcast strategy intensive spots. Cool. What are the FAQ episodes we can really release? What are the questions that I'm getting on a ton of sales calls right now? And I need to speak to. And I need to speak to it in a way that I can go, oh, we just talked about that last week on the podcast. I will go look at my FAQ episodes, the episodes I have built to answer those frequently asked questions. Honestly, this will probably become one of those assets. The third one, the repeatable series, that's the one I'm putting in when I'm planning a quarter. That's the one I'm putting in because I know I need a chunk here. Most often, these fall into two categories. One, they're part of launch or pre-launch content, and they go when we open doors because we open the doors once a year, and so we run this series, and then we open the doors, and then we've got this other content. That's super common. The other side of this is I know my show does this, and so I'm going to do that. Meaning, again, the Podcast Housekeeping series exists and was built to fill this time in August because generally the show slows down here. We see it tick down in downloads. Everybody's just trying to ride out that into summer. Here on the West Coast, here in Southern California, my kid will be back in school by the end of this month. First day of school's last week of August. So we're sort of split between sucking every last bit of summer vacation up and shifting into back to school mode. Certainly this year, that's the case. But everybody is checked out for sort of whatever reason, or sort of half checked in. And so I wanted something to sit here that I knew would be good, that I knew would be valuable, that I knew would be in line with what I share and how we sort of behave this time of year. Like I've talked about, Q3 for me is a lot of experimentation, a lot of planning for the next year, whatever that may look like. That's a lot of what I do in Q3. And so this made total sense to sit there. For a couple of our clients where they have something like this, a repeatable series is that year between, that last week of the year between like Christmas and New Year's, where they've got something that is sort of setting people up for stuff we're going to sell in Q1 that takes them through a challenge. And we know that we've got a tighter production schedule because we have everything done through the end of January before our team takes off the last 2 weeks of the year. Most of our clients at this point, honestly, also take off those last couple weeks of the year. So everybody's trying to get ahead. So if we have something that's repeatable that we can just build and run at the end of the year every year, that helps cut down that production overwhelm. And so it serves us to have something at the ready that sits there based on sort of like external timing circumstances or external sort of seasonal stuff, right? That's what I want you to be looking at with your repeatable series. Again, if you have any sort of follow-up questions or if this brought up more questions for you, make sure you bring them to us at the roundtable. I'd love to answer them. I also wanted to let you know before I let you go today, and I am going to do that because we're coming up on the 30-minute mark, but I did want to remind you, we do have spots open right now for those Q3 podcast strategy intensives. If planning your Q4 is something you'd like some support on because you want to be building the kind of episodes and assets that let you do what we talked about today, where you've got a library of most popular, of frequently asked questions, of repeatable series that you can be pulling from because you need to get yourself some space. You need to be able to step back and relax. You've got your own stuff you're managing and getting ready for. Then we need to have an intensive because like I mentioned earlier in the episode, the only way you have reliable, valuable stuff to pull from is if you start at the very beginning by strategically building assets that are repurposable. That's what we do in podcast strategy intensives, and that's what I would love to do with you. So head on over to uncommonlymore.com/intensive to learn more about the podcast strategy intensive, and I will see you there. And of course, I will see you on the roundtable, and most importantly, I will see you right back here next week. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Remember that content consumption does not make changes. So commit to doing something from today's episode. Maybe it's taking action on what we talked about. Maybe it's reaching out to me and learning more about podcast strategy intensives or what podcast production looks like with our team. All of that is over at uncommonlymore.com. And if you haven't yet signed up for the podcast newsroom, I want to remind you that is a great next step. If you're not really sure what comes next, hang out over there. Get those exclusive private episodes. That's over at podcastnewsroom.com. And the last favor I will ask, because social proof is endlessly important for sure, is to leave a rating or review for the show. If you go to ratethispodcast.com/more, that's the easiest way to do it. But I would love to hear what you thought of the show, what you think of the show, and if the show has been helpful for you. I can't wait to chat with you. So this is just the start of the conversation. Reach out so we can keep it going. Talk soon.